So, hi, I'd like to welcome Jeff Koyen.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Great. Yes, this is a second in our series of interviews around our J.S.G. Boggs project with laCollection. As we've launched this week the first ever NFT project with this legendary American artist. I am Katie Kennedy. I am Director of Art Partnerships at laCollection, as Jeff knows. And maybe you would like to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. My name is Jeff Koyen. I'm a career journalist, but also in sort of hobbyist for and side projects. I've been involved with cryptocurrencies for a while in various art projects, and sort of this Boggs collaboration is sort of a perfect intersection of all my interests.
Yeah, so that's it. Today in our conversation, we're really going to get into that side of Boggs's work, his legacy. You have a great interest, I know, in art and currency, and of course, this expertise from the crypto and NFT world, which you're bringing to the state, which is fascinating. But maybe I'm just going to start by asking how you came across the work of Boggs in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like he's bubbled up in my interests over the years, and I know a friend of mine worked on a magazine where they tried to get him. They tried to commission some work, 15 years ago. But in terms of direct access, it's really came through the cryptocurrency realm. In that, Boggs is mentioned. We'll talk about this later. I think Boggs is really very much a spiritual influence on cryptocurrency, and so he gets mentioned in a lot of these circles, and that's how I came across him. And I just found it fascinating. Again, we'll go into it in more detail, how much 20, 30 years ago he was there questioning the value of currency. And that just sort of caught the Boggs bug is what a lot of people call it. And I caught it hard several years ago.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, people are always fascinated by his personality. It's very much his art and the person himself who intrigues everyone. And it's interesting that you came into this actually from the crypto world,
Mhm.
as today, of course, we're doing a project, and maybe that segues into a little bit into discussing how you joined the estate
Mhm.
in the role really of the advisor for these Web3 projects.
Yeah, it's a very crazy story, and my wife likes to say it's a very sort of Jeff occurrence to have happen. I went with a friend and partner, Alex Zychek, about 4 years ago. We were toying around early NFT days. NFTs were not known at all yet. They were barely known in some of the crypto circles I was speaking at and presenting. I was trying to educate people about this token standard, and Alex and I had an idea, having been sparked by this Boggs bug, to create an online gallery for NFT art inspired by and in the tradition of Boggs's work. So basically, currency art, money art, but also sort of the culture jamming aspect, not just strictly drawing on dollar bills, but sort of the questioning, the culture jam, the punkiness of it. What kind of artists were out there? And so we sort of put up a storefront, and then COVID hit, and so we sort of backburnered it. Everybody went into their caves and huddled up and took care of their kids and became grade school teachers, at least in my case. But the website stayed up there, and we kept toying around with it. We kept, reaching out to other artists. And then the craziest thing happened is one day an email came saying from the estate of J.S.G. Boggs. And, being in this end of sort of media, sort of this punky culture jamming side of things, I immediately figured I was in trouble. I was waiting for the cease and desist letter saying, stop using, my brother or cousin's name in vain. But it was quite the opposite. It's the estate of J.S.G. Boggs. It's his relatives, it's his cousins, aunts, and uncles, because Boggs died without any children when he died 5 years ago. But the estate liked what we were doing and wanted to talk, and we had a conversation, and it was just such a fantastic conversation. The estate is doing the hard work of preserving and extending his legacy and his body of work, and they're going through archives and vastly unorganized. When somebody passes away unexpectedly, you tend not to have your archives in order, especially if you're a working artist. And that was Boggs. So they weren't sure what to do, and Alex and I had a vision already for what Boggs can be and where he could fit into this Web 3.0 and crypto and cypherpunk sort of landscape, and we'd seen his influence already into this world. And so we decided to work together. They are working on the physical archives, and they're doing their thing, and they wanted sort of help and a roadmap to go digital with the work, and that's how we are here today.
That's really fascinating. And of course, I can imagine your reaction when you see an email
Yeah,
from the estate when you're doing this type
yeah,
of project. And I know
yeah.
that your project or the website's called Boggs with a Z. So
Right.
it's very much a homage, I would say, to Boggs as an artist
Yeah.
and what he represents. And maybe we'll come to that as well in a little bit in more detail. But yeah, I really wanted to actually circle back to this idea, this fundamental idea of what makes Boggs a crypto interesting in the crypto world. If you could really share with us, what your understanding of how he would be interested in that and how he started to get interested in that very early.
Yeah, absolutely. I will touch very briefly on what he did for listeners and watchers, I'm sure, know about him. But Boggs is his claim to fame, let's say, he had a couple different phases in his career. But his real claim to fame was drawing or painting representations of bills, of dollar bills, of franc notes, of euros, and then taking them into stores and establishments and spending them. He said he never sold his work, he spent them. So if he had a drawing of a $100 bill and he wanted some art supplies, he'd go to the art store and it was definitely a song and dance, and there's video out there of him making the pitch. He's very much a pitch man. And he said one time out of 10, somebody would understand what he was doing, and they'd take that $100 bill drawing and treat it like $100. And that's the key. If he was buying $90 worth of art supplies, they gave him $10 back as change. And then the genius part was a gallery owner or a collector would then go and try to secure all those pieces, collect the bill, collect the receipt, maybe even some of the art supplies, and put that as a work called a transaction. And that's his most important works that are collected around the world in private collections. So that's a long way around to saying Boggs created his own unit of currency. Sort of like a small town that has a barter system or a local currency. He created something that said, this is going to be worth $100 because we both say it is. And that's an encapsulation of Bitcoin. I can't think of a better encapsulation of Bitcoin, where for 10 years I've been hearing people say, it's just digital files, it's garbage, it doesn't mean anything, what's it worth? Well, it's worth what people say it's worth. And if I'm going to give you one for that and you're going to give me one for that, that's what it is worth. And that's what Boggs was doing 30 years ago. He created his own local network currency, and people would collect the bills and exchange them, and they'd gain value. Think about a transaction that was bought for $5,000 by a gallery, sold to a museum for $10,000. That's appreciation of a local currency, really at core. It's an art project, it's performative, but that's really it is. He created his own currency. And so then 20 years later, you have founders of Second Life, who was an early sort of metaverse project, taking inspiration from Boggs and saying, we're going to have our own in-game currency. And you see World of Warcraft, they have their own in-game currencies. Games now, as a standard, have their own in-game currency. And then you have the Ethereums and the Bitcoins of the world. Boggs did that in the 80s. And he's unsung or undersung, I would say, but really catching on in this community. The people who are designing the infrastructure and the philosophies of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, most of them know about Boggs.
Yeah, so it's very much this kind of not only was it a philosophical forefather, but also he was doing it. He was kind of out there actually doing it, and I suppose in this context, it's useful to talk about the interest that attracted from governments, because of course crypto and all these bitcoins are very much causing a lot of trouble, let's say. And in fairness, Boggs managed to really attract the attention of the various governments, so the Bank of England or the Feds in the US. So what he was doing was not insignificant. They certainly didn't consider it insignificant, because I suppose the implications are quite vast. So how would you connect this, what he was doing, so the hand-drawn notes, etc., how would you make this kind of link with the digital era?
Well, Boggs himself bridged that divide in the 90s. He was an early adopter. So for all his, he was educated, say, in the late 70s and the 80s. He really hit his peak in Europe and then in America with these hand-drawn bills. But he was quick to understand the power of digital art composition. And a lot of, or if not most of his work in the 90s was at least finished in Photoshop. And I've heard from people that once he hit the printout that he liked, he deleted his files. The estate's trying to figure that out. They've got a lot of disk drives they're still going through to see if those PSD files are there. But very much like, an artist burning the masters, or, once the screen prints are done, you break the plates,
Yeah.
sort of in the old analogy. But Boggs was digital, and he had a website in the late 90s. We've uncovered a relationship where he was working on what was called an online encrypted currency in the late 90s. This is 10 years before Satoshi's white paper. And we're also in contact with the people he worked with there who were heavy into stenography and digital watermarking. So he's there. He's there, if not in the room, but philosophically at the birth of, the white paper comes out, 13 years ago, but 10 years before that is when and even in the 90s, the philosophical underpinnings of crypto were being discussed. Smart contracts were proposed in the early 90s when he was on the scene. So I think there was a direct through line, not just an abstract philosophical connection 30 years ago. He was in the room, perhaps even in the room with some of these people who were figuring this out.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly saw that there was a reference to encrypted currency in an article dating, I think, from the year 2000. So this is, very much documented. So he was very much interested in protocols as well as an artist. I mean, in our discussion with Craig, we saw how much he was, noting down serial numbers and attaching them to everything and very much controlling the process. So I think, would you say that also has a kind of connection to this kind of very codified nature of things?
Yeah, I think he had a keen understanding of the importance of authentication. He was very protective of his intellectual property, and he understood the power of copyright. And as much as he wanted to distribute these things, he wanted ownership to come back to him. And I don't think it was in a control freaky way. My sense is it was in an authenticating kind of way. And in your conversation with Craig, or if you've seen the records, if he was doing an edition that was like laser printed or offset print, he would do squiggly patterns on the back and then cut the sheet. Because then if you wanted to authenticate, you had to come back to the sheet or you had to go back to another bill. And that's sort of, in my mind, philosophically, it is a prototypical decentralized authentication. You needed one of the other pieces to authenticate the other. And I absolutely find that fascinating. It's sort of like a public key encryption. You could exchange two pieces, but if you don't have the right piece for each other, you're not validated or authenticated. He was doing that in physical form. His serial numbers, his inside jokes, his signatures. Like he really got it. He wanted his works to go out there and to survive him with their own sort of sense of authentication.
Mm-hmm. A system that kind of functions independently of him. And we're actually seeing this with the estate, of course. Craig can authenticate pieces by doing this checking against templates and things like that. So maybe if we just actually take this idea of art and currency, which is what you were also exploring, I think, in Boggs, in your website, the project that connected you guys to the estate. So how would you situate Boggs within the context of at least maybe the last 100 years of art? I know you've got some ideas around that.
Well, some of the classic examples that you'll hear are, I assume it's real, but it's also held up as apocryphal, that Picasso would write checks to his vendors or his not his dentist, that's Duchamp, but he'd write checks knowing they'd never be cashed because the signature was more valuable than the check itself. Duchamp paid his dentist, same thing with a piece of art or a check that he never intended to be cashed. And even earlier in the Americas, there's a tradition of realistic artwork and the Secret Service coming in and seizing them because the painting was too realistic. Now, if we look at these paintings through a modern eye, it seems ridiculous that these would seem to be a threat to money. But if you think about, the eyes of 150 years ago, seeing a painting that looks so realistic was probably, awe-inspiring. We don't have digital reproduction has sort of changed our standard for that. So I see Boggs on that continuity. And he's told the story too, that at his conventions, he has seen checks that he's written uncashed in glass being sold. So there is a direct connection to these sort of, understanding the power of the art over the money. And then because he is in the modern age and he did work into the 90s, I do see him as sort of ushering us forward. So and that's why crypto appealed to me when I got into it, 10 years ago, because it's that culture jamming aspect. It is that saying, everybody, if they make money in crypto, eventually turns it into cash to buy a house because you have to buy a house with cash. So we understand the importance of these institutions at present, but there is a freedom and a cultural excitement to untethering ourselves from the government currencies. And that's what's excited me about Boggs, what excites me about crypto. And I think he was right there for it. Untethering the exchange of value from the gatekeepers. And, he was a lot more punk rock than people were even realizing. He was thumbing his nose in the early 90s, going to jail several times. Like he was pushing the limits of this untethering. And I think he should be, respected widely for this.
Yeah, I think one word you used in what you were saying there, which is very interesting, is the threat. It's this idea that one guy kind of going around drawing some art and using it as tender has become such a menace, a threat, a government level threat. And I suppose that this really brings back to this idea of what money is and how we decide what it is, and essentially the fragility of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. It's sort of like the story about Al Capone, the gangster, being taken down on tax evasion, not for the crimes. I feel like at a certain point, the government has to throw up its hands and say, okay, just pay your taxes. I don't care if you bought that car or the motorcycle in Boggs' case, with 5 $1,000 bill drawings. I don't care. But that counts as a taxable event. Just pay income on that income tax or whatever on that $5,000. And I'd have to track down the quote, but I think there is a quote out there from Boggs saying, like, my taxes are meticulous. Because he was smart enough to know that's how a government's going to come after you. That is the big cudgel, the last resort cudgel of a lot of governments that say, fine, you're going to make this medium exchange. You're going to have a local currency. Just pay it by the book so we can get our share. And crypto people would be wise to remember that. Do whatever you want. Just pay your taxes and you're going to be okay.
Yes, I think that's actually a very good point. It resonates that he was very meticulous in his taxes, because from what I see from he may be very counterculture, and the image of the guy on the motorbike and his performative aspect, but the control, the level of control and systematization of the artwork is actually contrary to that, or surprising, let's say. And then, with the idea of taxation, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest, that he's really, I've got that covered. And I think it's really important to point out, in case anybody didn't see the first podcast, or who maybe doesn't know his work, that there is zero notion of counterfeiting involved in Boggs. It's very important to kind of come back to that, especially when we're talking about legal situations. But I mean, maybe you'd like to say a few words about this, but for example, there's very often nothing on the back of the notes. So they are extraordinarily easy to identify as not being a counterfeit.
Yeah, and the big famous case was the Bank of England, where he was brought up on counterfeiting charges on behest of the Bank of England, rather. They didn't arrest him, but it was on their behest. And he was acquitted by a jury in, record time or something, because it was patently clear on the face that he was not attempting to deceive anybody. Some of his artworks, there's one up in the Fitzwilliam in the UK right now. The bill is 8 feet wide. Nobody's bringing that. It's like bringing one of those, lottery checks, or one of those giant checks and trying to go to the supermarket. He never intended to deceive. He, again, from the start said he spent his art, never sold it. And anybody looking at it, it would be absurd to think you'd mistake it for real money. And it really, I imagine at some point he got annoyed with that. It's like, I never in a million years am I trying to pretend this is otherwise. So just let me pay my taxes and go about my art project.
Yeah, because the process is, of course, quite interesting, that he really lays it out, and you can see that in the performances, or what he himself called performative art is he quite clearly explains its artworks, etc., etc. So it's a big challenge in the process. He's challenging people, and I think Bitcoin challenges people to question their relationship with money. And Boggs, of course, when he was standing in front of someone, literally saying to them, will you accept this? It puts people in a very, very, I would say, charged state of being. Almost, obviously, you can see unease, even though he's, charming. What would you say about that, and the way that people maybe feel about Bitcoin today? This kind of distrust and not knowing quite how to react.
Yeah, I think there's many analogies there, and there's many stories of, some guy. I personally knew some guy who went to sell a truck, and this was 6 years ago, and the guy offered him either it was Ethereum or it was Bitcoin, obviously when the price was very low, and he took it. It was like $5,000 worth of that, and he was, it's just like in Boggs. These are generally people who are in the working class. He would go to the cashiers and the waiters and offer it. Sometime a manager would come in, So sometimes a restaurant would own that bill. Sometimes just the waiter would out of pocket it. And Bitcoin's very much the same way. You have people who are like, well, I'm trying to sell that truck. I need the $5,000, but this is kind of weird, or I kind of trust my friend who just told me about that. So I'll take a flyer on it, and I'll maybe have a little hardship because I needed that cash. But if you sit and have faith, or even if you don't have faith, even if it's just a weird experiment for you, like I've got plenty of friends who are sitting well at a loss on the experiment I posed to them. And if they could sit and hold it and forget about it, maybe in 10 years, you're sitting on a very valuable museum quality Boggs or a lot more cryptocurrency. It's not unlike itself. It's really the same sort of dynamic, the same challenge.
Super interesting. So if we kind of come around to the project that we are working on today, or that we've produced and that is now being officially launched, maybe you could take me through the thought process of that, because you contacted laCollection, which we were immediately very excited about. But maybe you could tell us, how the idea generated and what you were really hoping to achieve.
Yeah, with our arrangement relationship with the estate was to start testing the water with NFTs. Obviously, they hadn't done anything of this sort before. It was honestly when the NFT market was so frothy and Bored Apes were selling for millions of dollars. But if we cared about that, we would have gone out the door a year ago, and we didn't. We wanted to find the right project, select the right works, and the right way of doing this. And we came across you guys, and you had just sort of launched. Was it with the British Museum, your first projects?
That's correct.
And we thought, if they would take us on, we'd be thrilled. And you did. And I think some people over there got the bug. And you guys are a Web3 platform. You're a crypto platform. You're blockchain-based art. So it would make sense that philosophically you would see this. If we went knocking the doors of a traditional gallery, they'd be like, I don't know, this isn't our thing. But this is your thing. This is NFTs. This is extending the legacy and the value of estate-held and museum-held collections. So that's how we got together, and we were popping the champagne when you agreed to work with us. Now, in terms of putting the right collection together, your team and our team, we collaborated and went through a lot of ideas. Boggs, as I said, had sort of three distinct stages in his career: the early bills, the transactions, and later he was sort of like mass-producing sort of stunty these fun bucks that he did with the coin and money collectors. And I think we went back and forth on all three. And we settled on his early works. And I'm glad we did, because we settled on his works that were mostly European in nature. So we have a British pound note, we have a franc, we have a euro. And that, for me, I wouldn't say it's his most exciting time, but it's when his career sparked up. And I think it's when he really saw what he was doing. Was maybe he started it as a stunt. I'm not sure. But it opened up the possibilities. He did sculptures in Germany. He had gallery shows all across Europe and Switzerland and the UK. Of course, he got arrested. And I think we settled on the right thing. 5 of these classic bank Boggs bills, hand-drawn, and we're doing reproductions of them. We're launching with the British 50-pound note, which it was in the collection. I think we made it first, considering the passing of the Queen. And I think it's really exciting. I was with your crew in New York for the Egon Schiele launch. And one of the questions was what's the value of this? And these works are not going to, especially in the case of Egon Schiele, these works are never going to go into private collection. They're never going to leave the museum, ever. Now, the Boggs works, maybe they'll go up for auction. Maybe they won't. Maybe there'll be a Boggs museum in a few years. Who knows? But this is an opportunity to get access to these and to the estate. We all came up with a great idea together with your NFT, you get the digital file, classic NFT, but we're producing a limited edition of that bill and a receipt in classic Boggs fashion. So every purchaser, every buyer gets a receipt with their crypto transaction, just like Boggs demanded a receipt in his transactions. So he's not around, obviously. We would like to think we're honoring his legacy. We got the blessing of people that knew him. Craig, as you mentioned, is an old friend. There's other people in the community. They've been excited about it. His biographer thought Boggs would like this kind of stuff. So we didn't take it lightly that we're extending a dead artist's work, but we're not just carpetbaggers coming from the outside. This is the estate itself. This is the people that knew him, loved him, and are taking the responsibility of preserving his work very seriously. So hey, long way around. We're excited about what we've done. And I think we've chosen an incredible format and number of works to launch with.
Yeah, I really think that what came forward when we were all putting this project together was the sense that we wanted to really do justice to the artist. For those who actually knew him, of course, the director of the estate is his cousin. This is somebody who knew him since childhood. Of course, Craig, a very good friend, and you, a very long time admirer. So, and of course, the laCollection team really kind of got on board and very involved in this. And I think that people who come across Boggs's work do kind of generally. Life changing is one word, but there certainly is. He has an impact. His philosophy and the way he lived his life has an impact. And what I love about the drop that we put together is all these elements, because Boggs liked to kind of launch things out into the out into the wild and then see what happened and how these values increase, decrease, get exchanged. What would you kind of imagine as being an ideal scenario, or just, what could happen with all these different elements? NFT, printed, limited edition, the transaction receipt. What are you thinking?
I mean, I'd like to think that anyone who buys one will keep it all together. I don't, maybe over time collections split up, but I would think that anybody who's buying this is a Boggs admirer and understands the importance of keeping all these pieces together. I certainly will. I will keep the NFT in my wallet where I usually store it, but I'm sure I'll put a copy of the digital file in a box with the, with the actual physical items. The other thing is Boggs is not an unapproachable artist in terms of collecting. His later works, where he was mass producing these sort of promotional fun bucks, they're available for a couple $100. On Heritage and eBay. I'll go to Heritage if you're going to buy. eBay is eBay. But they're accessible for a casual or an entry level collector. But his banknotes aren't. These are valuable pieces. They're limited edition. They're hand drawn. The estate is archiving them and cataloging them. Will they be available to collectors anytime? Maybe years from now. By then, maybe his reputation is back to where it should be, and these prices may be completely inaccessible. The NFT and the estate produced print and the receipt is it's a first ever of its kind. To have the digital component, we have to think Boggs would love it, and I have to think that collectors are going to, cherish it and hold on to it for years to come. I will.
Yeah. I do believe so. And you're right. You're right to point out, at least in any case, the bills that we have chosen were chosen for their rarity, for their originality, and there's not so many of these original works in circulation. So there is a big, as you say, people who generally buy Boggs like to hold on to Boggs.
Yeah.
So that's really, really important. So, to conclude, I think my question would be kind of what's next?
Well, we've got this drop and we have 4 more coming. We have one sale live with you. So this is going to be a very exciting 5 weeks for us. It's also, to be honest, a great chance for us to take a little bit of a breather. So now it's just out to promote and try to get it in front of the collectors. But the estate is planning more NFT editions. We will concentrate maybe on some of the more American art and see about the American market. And now it's the same conversations. Which works? What are their story? How do they resonate with collectors? And sort of what format does it take? And how do we collect them together? So, stay tuned. We're not going to announce anything yet because it's not set. We want to do this collection with you and see it take off.
Wonderful. And maybe you could say a few words about where the proceeds will go. I'm sure they're going towards really supporting the estate.
Absolutely. The estate is a labor of love. This is not the estate of Picasso. These are people. His estate is, his loved ones, his family, doing this as a passion project. Me too. I'm not on staff or anything like that. This is an advisory thing because it's a passion project. And any of these funds will go to this. There are expenses for the estate to catalog and store, and even just recovering all of his works where he lived in Florida to bring it back to a safe spot. That costs money. So the proceeds of this sale will go to supporting those efforts.
Wonderful. Well, that's great to know that this is really going to, advance the archiving. As you say, when an artist dies young, there's a lot to be done. And, normally artists have the chance to get these things in order. And many of them spend years doing this, actually. So it's a big job. And I know that there's a passionate team behind it. And I can't wait to see what happens next.
Thank you very much.
So let me thank you for your time. It's been really fascinating talking with you, and we will speak soon and see what happens next.
Love it. Thank you again for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take care.